Hey folks, might as well go ahead and get started, I guess. A few
Hello.
things to cover this week. I see Alexa's here. Alexa, you want to say anything to kick us off? All right. Well, we might as well go ahead and get going then. I'll wait. We'll swing over to Alexa whenever she's got her voice behaving. Let's see. Other than Animesh, we do have a little bit of news on the Bakes on Mesh project. I know we've had a lot of people interested in asking about that over the last few months. That is underway now. Anchor's working on it. Don't know any definite time frames or anything, but so far I guess it seems to be going well, and he's feeling optimistic about it. The way we're going to be doing that, we think, is using a technique that basically only requires viewer side work. We'd originally thought of it as being something where we were going to be adding additional properties uh, to the objects, which would mean server work. But the alternative that we're looking at now is just to use magic texture UUIDs. So basically, if you've got an object that says it's using a certain UUID as its on a given face, then that is interpreted as put the head bake here or something like that. So if we do that, then it should be possible to do the whole thing with viewer work, which should shorten the development time frame. That still leaves the question sort of partway open of exactly how we're going to handle uh, the making your system avatar transparent part, which is uh, and there's various possible approaches there that give you more or less control over exactly how that works. So we'll keep you in the loop as we get a chance to think more about that. Everybody hear me okay?
Yep.
Yep. Okay, great. Alexa, you have your voice working yet? No. All right. Okay, so that is Bakes on Mesh. Let's see. Is there a writer in the house? I don't see writer. So I don't know what's going on with EAP. As far as I know, he's still working on that. So then for Animesh things, we've got a few different developments. There is an update to the appearance service that's in the works. I don't know if everybody remembers all the details on this stuff. It gets a little mind-numbing when you get into the appearance service, but basically there's some calculations that the appearance service has to do based on what meshes you have attached to yourself, and the function there is to compensate for if you're wearing a rigged mesh that changes your height in some way. And going through these fixes helps keep your feet on the ground. But doing those calculations isn't actually a good idea for Animesh objects because they actually aren't rigged to your skeleton. They have their own skeleton. And the appearance service doesn't know the difference or didn't know the difference. So the change that we have now is when it's doing the processing of your attached meshes, it can actually distinguish between Animesh objects and non-Animesh objects and try to do the right thing. And so that's been deployed now to Damballa and Aditi. So hopefully you should be seeing the correct behavior now for the appearance service. If you play around with Animesh attachments versus non-Animesh attachments, you should see your feet in the right place. The previous version of the appearance service actually had a different bug, which was that it didn't do any processing at all of joint positions. So that one wasn't wrong for Animesh, but it was wrong for rigged mesh. So in any case, now that that's hopefully all fixed, take a look and let me know how it works out for you. What else? We have a viewer update. The project viewer got updated within the last few days. Mostly bug fix work there. There's a recent change that I think got in that update, although maybe it was right after that update went out, for dealing with mesh upload. There's been an issue with attachment points, especially if they had spaces in their names, and the viewer wouldn't let you upload those. Now we're doing the same kind of fix up that Firestorm is, so you can. The problem is a lot of files don't let you have joints with spaces in them. So we're doing the same kind of fix up Firestorm is now, where the if you have an attachment name and you just name it with an underscore instead of a space, then it gets translated at upload time. So that all seems to be working. I'm not positive that fixes in the currently deployed version of the viewer, but if it's not, it'll be in the next one. We've got a fix for at least one crash. If anybody's still getting crashes, related to Animesh content in the viewer after this last update, please let us know. There was one way we found that was pretty easy to get things to crash by changing the Animesh flag on an object, and hopefully that category of thing isn't going to act up anymore. But if it does, give us a shout. Let's see, what else? We have an update to the viewer, update to the server that went out yesterday. That has an increase to the triangle count to 50K, so I hope that will be helpful for the people who have been trying to do tests with objects that needed a bit more than the current limit. What we're ultimately going to be doing with that is still up in the air, but the 50 is what we have right now, which was what we talked about the last time.
When was this changed? I just tested
2 weeks ago.
This. I just tried to do something the other day that was like 30, and it wouldn't work.
Just yesterday was when the update went out, in the afternoon.
Okay, that makes sense. Oh, and thank you.
And oh, yeah, sure. So I think that is it for the kind of canned content I had for this week. Anybody has questions, things they want to talk about, we can entertain anything there. So, what are you guys up to?
Yeah, I had to dig my car out of like 10 inches of snow, so that's all I've been doing today.
Yeah, we've started snow season here too. It's always fun. Yeah, I bet if you're in the wilds of Canada, you're having even more snow fun than we are in Boston. I have a question about the 50K limit. That was just based on the discussion at the meeting 2 weeks ago. We had some folks, I think mainly Carrie, was saying that it was problematic to do testing at 20, but that at 50 it should be reasonably feasible. So, it's as I say, it's not intended to say anything about what our final policy is going to be, or whether we're going to have a hard limit or whatever. But it's just intended to be high enough that it lets people do useful testing right now. Yeah, it's a change to the value we're using in the test regions. Limit for attached animesh. Do you mean limit on how many attached animeshes, or the limit on complexity? Just the number of them. Yeah. I haven't really looked at that anymore. Yeah, it's currently set to one. Obviously, having a very large number is going to be kind of problematic in terms of overhead. But we haven't really had any specific discussions. It seemed like the most common use case was a pet, and you typically have one pet at a time. So that was, to the extent that we had any kind of definite motivation, that seemed like a reasonable value. What if you're asking about that? I assume you're interested in use cases that involve more. What kinds of things are you thinking about? So if you're trying to combo a mature object with say a pet, then you'd want more like two. Animated hair sounds like fun. Has anybody played around with that yet? Seems like it would be hard to get animated hair as Animesh that really worked right because it would tend to get out of sync with your own skeleton, wouldn't it? Wouldn't it be more common that you'd want to use hair that was just a rigged mesh that used your own skeleton? Put it on the head attach point. Yeah, I don't know. It might work. Has anybody actually tried it yet?
I would imagine that Animesh hair would be actually much easier than like bento hair, because the pelvis is the central axis. Everything is attached to the pelvis, so you place that on basically the top of the skull, and the hair flows down from there. It would be pretty simple, actually.
Yeah, that'd be interesting if people try that.
And if you made an AO with it, it would fake flowing with wind and stuff, because when you walked, you'd need an animation for walking, and walking is walking forward, so the hair would go back. So it would look like, real hair, kind of.
Yeah, I like the use case that the hair is also sort of a pet. You could have like, Medusa could have this bundle of snakes on her head and then she could set them down and they could scuttle around or something.
That would probably be a little bit more complicated. I'd want little tongues flickering out and stuff too.
Well, yeah, it could get a little complicated.
So what's next? Are we waiting on any bugs, or like what's next on the list for Animesh?
Yeah, I'm basically just working down the bug list. It is getting shorter, which is nice. Occasionally we get a new thing come in, like I think Lucia posted a thing about using the animation info option to like mess things up. But at least for the most part, we're getting the list down. Let's see what's left to do there. One issue that's a lot less common than it used to be is it's still possible to get objects that'll disappear when they go into like Animesh objects where they'll become invisible if they're displayed in their sort of static mesh state. So there's some kind of graphics pipeline glitch that seems like it only affects some Animesh objects. A lot of them are well behaved at this point, but I can definitely reproduce it with some test objects. So still hoping to get a fix in for that. We've had the uh, as we discussed before, the kind of the last stage before we can go live is when you do performance profiling and figure out what the final complexity limits and land impact and all that stuff are going to be. I'm sure that's going to take a while, but we kind of need to get the rest of the bugs knocked down first. there's a couple of issues related to clicking and interacting with Animesh objects. Like if it's playing, you can't touch it, right? So you can't actually define a touch event. You can right click and pick touch out of the menu, but you can't just touch it by left clicking on it. And also, if you're trying to do multi-select, like select a bunch of Animesh things that are all playing, you can't use left click for that. So those would be nice to get fixed. Need to review how LODs are getting handled. I think right now, basically, Animesh are being treated the same as avatars for purposes of deciding what LOD they're displayed at. That's not necessarily what they should be doing. Maybe we want to be treating them more like other enrolled objects. So if we want to do that, then that's going to require a little bit of additional tweaking. Let's see. I think those are the main things in terms of kind of actual bug fixes. There's a couple of feature requests that we're kind of keeping an eye on to see whether they turn out to be essential or not. Just trying to do kind of the minimal set of LSL related functions.
Didn't it say in the release notes that Animesh is now imposters?
Oh, that's right. I should have mentioned that in the when we were talking about the new viewer release. That's one of the other changes that's in there now, is that the imposters should get handled correctly. It's all basically the same, I think, pool of imposters that as avatars. So based on basically proximity and pixel area, it decides who to display at full detail and who to imposter.
So that's interesting. And we have preferences where we can set those things up, and so that includes Animesh too, not just regular avatars
now. Should be, yeah. There's a thing you can set for, I don't know, max number of non-impostered objects or something. I forget what they call it, but if you set that, then it should apply to avatars and Animesh objects in the scene all together. There was a question about Animesh being able to wear attachments. Not for the initial release. I know that's one of the things that people have asked about at various times. And when we do kind of follow-on work for kind of next stage development here, that's one of the things we'd think about. But we wouldn't be doing that for the initial release, which we're trying to get out. Basically as soon as we can knock down these essential bugs and pick the land impact rules and so forth.
When you attach a prim to Animesh, where does that prim supposed to go?
Well, I mean, the way an Animesh works is it's you've got a link set that can have multiple prims in it, and they all get displayed based. Since they're all rigged meshes, they get displayed based on the location of the Animesh.
Well, I'm talking about a non-rigged, just prim, like a box. I did some testing on that, and it seemed to go wherever it wanted to, depending on when it was linked or whatever, and also the physics of that prim object did not match up with what I was seeing.
That's possible. Since the displayed geometry is based on the location of the skeleton, it's not sort of inherently going to be lined up with the
Because
the sort of standard location. What it should do is, say you define a bunch of objects. You've got a bunch of boxes or whatever, and you link them all into one link set. Right now, they've all got kind of different positions relative to each other, and say we're just talking about the ones that aren't rigged meshes, right? They only have kind of a stat display. They don't change based on the skeleton, but they're part of the animated object, link set. Okay, so if you do that, then what happens is that the skeleton gets aligned to the root prim, right? I think it's the root joint of the skeleton gets lined up with the position of the root prim. So then the other objects, should just have the same. They should maintain the same relative position, relative to that root object. So, you could have a bunch of kind of cubes floating around or whatever. But then if you have something that's rigged, then it's going to be displayed kind of relative to that root prim of all of those things that you put together.
Yeah, it was just that the physics was way off to the side. The physics of the box was way off to the side of where the box. So I was bumping into, so it's not. I can't see.
Yeah. Did you have the physics in the root prim, or was it in one of the others?
The box, the prim box was the root prim. And then the animated, the rigged meshes were linked to that.
Yeah, I'm not sure why it would be off to the side then. Yeah, as Lucia says, the intention is that the physics should basically behave the same, whether you've got rigged stuff or not.
Yeah, so I wasn't sure if the physics is moving out to the side or if the visual part is getting like it's linked to the skeleton, the root of the
Is it
skeleton.
possible you were playing an animation that moves your skeleton off to the side or something like that?
No, it wasn't.
Because, of course, you can have an animation that'll move your pelvis or whatever, and then that'll kind of dislocate your whole skeleton relative to the root.
Right, I'll have to do some more testing on it to see. I was basically trying to use the box as basically a physics, like a hitbox to it, and then also for positioning the mesh over the ground.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a fairly recent change supporting, having a root prim or other prims that are not mesh objects. So I haven't heard a lot about how that's been going for people. Has anybody else had a chance to play around with that? Okay, Lucia says it's working. Yeah, I think there's, as Aki mentions, the unrigged stuff doesn't really move along with it in the sense that it's not, it's not animated. It's not associated with any of the the bones um, in your Animesh skeleton. So um, it's it's as you're playing animations, you're going to tend to sort of move out from under, or move sideways with respect to, or whatever, your static objects, and you're going to have similar issues with the. I think we've talked about this before with the sit position. If you have defined a sit position on your Animesh object, that's also kind of static and not connected to the skeleton. So it seems like you'd have to do some kind of jiggering with your animations to, if you were trying to keep that stuff, kind of lined up in some meaningful way. Lucia mentions having skeleton be its own asset type. Yeah, that's a kind of an interesting possibility. We talked about that a little bit during the development of the Bento project. It's technically a fair amount of work, but you also get into basically anything where you try to have arbitrary skeletons. I think it also complicates things from a user experience perspective. Now there's things in the marketplace that you know work with one skeleton and not with another, and you need to be able to kind of communicate that and have some kind of standards around it. So it's at the time for Bento, we decided that was too hairy. It's definitely not something we're going to be considering for the initial release of Animesh either. I wouldn't completely rule out that we would consider it at some point, but it would be at best farther down the line.
Oh, I just noticed. I just turned on animation info, and the Animesh have animation info. That's kind of nice. And it says the name of the animations that are playing, which is different than the avatar.
Yeah, it actually tries to look up the name inside the object inventory if it can. Although I think it's probably only for your own objects or things that you have the privs to look at the content of.
Can we get that for avatars? Because that's like super useful.
Yeah, I don't know how hard it would be to add something like that for avatars. It's probably more complicated if you have to look in the in your entire inventory for an avatar. Could get slow.
Yeah, looking at UUIDs doesn't help me a whole lot.
Well, the avatar gives you names for some things. I mean, it tells you like, if you're running walk or fly or something, it knows names for some animations. But yeah, it may not know how to look up ones that you're playing out of your own inventory.
I'm telling you, the difference between an avatar and looking at this and knowing exactly which animations are playing and when. I mean, it's almost like a whole new thing. You know?
Oh, yeah, I guess we haven't talked about that one before. I put that in fairly early on because it was sort of hard to see what was going on otherwise.
Oh, it's in under development. Let me look real. Yeah, it's under development, avatar, and then animation info.
Yeah, that option's been there for a while for avatars, but we had support for it with Animesh as well. Yeah. So Lucia, you asked about res enforcement. So you've got that wolf thing there, which is quite a bit beyond the current limit. Did you res that before the limit went into effect, or have you found some interesting exploit there? Oh, it's attached. Oh, it's sneaky. Yeah. Lucia asked, and if anybody else had any interesting ways of resing things that were beyond what we thought the limit was, they might have noticed too. We actually check at res time now against the triangle count limit. The reason we did that was to make it easier to experiment with different settings, right? If we wanted to have a region where the limit was set higher or whatever, you know, it's fine to have that as some place where people can test other content, but then it would kind of defeat the purpose if you could then take that content and res it anywhere. So we kind of need to have checking at res time as well. But it's obviously that also demonstrates that the previous enforcement wasn't 100% effective. Well, I didn't realize I was ruining your fun, but I don't know. Perhaps there are other fun things to do. Yeah, I'll definitely put in a plug for Lucia's Dragons. She's got some in the Animesh adult region that are not strictly triangle limit compliant, although they're not that much higher than our current limit, actually. And they'll look really spiffy. Yeah, I'm not seeing any animations for the Wolfie thing. Oh, now it's moving. Sorry, what is the current major problem? You're not seeing animations that happen before you arrive in a region. Not loading unless they're updated. That's true. We were talking about what remaining issues there are for Animesh, and that's one that I forgot. We've had some. We haven't really had a Jira filed for exactly the issue you're talking about there, but I have. So that guy's still an attachment, huh? That's cool. Uh, but gotten some. Um, I have gotten some bug reports against some conditions where you don't get sort of timely updates on animations, like things that are in other animated objects in other regions. You know, if you res and there's kind of animated meshes next door, you don't necessarily see them moving quickly, that sort of thing. So it could be related to interest list stuff or whatever. So is this actually different? The problem here with not getting animations for your animation notifications for your objects, is that actually different than the behavior for avatars? Like if you res into a region where somebody is already playing some animation, you're not really going to get notified about that either, are you? I guess the difference there is that avatars sort of frequently have animation changes that are just generated by the simulator, so you may kind of get updates
Right.
more often because of that.
Right, that's it. You're regularly having changes to your avatar. So
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. Let me make a note about that.
but I don't think avatars work any differently. I don't think you don't see anything until something triggers something. Right.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the way it's implemented on the server, it's pretty much the same code. So my expectation would be that it's kind of under the hood. It's really doing pretty much the same stuff.
Well, that just says something about how people need to make and code things, though.
Yeah, I got to think about that one. I don't know if there's anything we can do, kind of on the simulator side to sort of help people catch up with things like that. But yeah, certainly there would be potentially ways you could work around on the, in the scripting. If anyone is seeing the wolf, as attached to Lucia skeleton, that's it's possible you're not running an Animesh viewer.
Right, exactly. You need animation changes though, just like on an avatar. That's another point too. That as I'm making things, like I just wouldn't make avatars the exact same way. So I think it's kind of, especially even with a bento, I don't think it's going to be very common for people to just res avatars because their eyes are going to pop into their head, their cheeks, or whatever. If it doesn't have animation playing on it, there's going to be issues. Especially since we don't have a shape. Like the body shape with the avatar kind of put certain things in place, like a lot of the bones that are used for the shape keys, like jaw shape and chin and all those. It kind of set things in a certain spot. Whereas with Animesh, there's no spot. I mean, if you don't set the bone there and set it there with an animation too, it could get all wacky.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you basically get your bones all in their default locations. I thought for the most part a neutral shape would put the bones in pretty much the same spot as the default location, but maybe that's not the case for all of them.
I'm not saying it's bad either. I mean, a lot of people would think it's good that, you know, for especially bento stuff, you can't just res it on the ground and do whatever you want with it. But I mean, there's Animesh is unique, and it probably needs to be developed in a unique way.
Yeah, and I mean supporting things like shapes is definitely something we've talked about as part of the kind of follow-on project. We would basically would need to get the bake service recognizing animeshes because that's where the params actually get applied. From your shape or from any other object that affects your sliders. I think there are a few in the hair that affect the sliders too. Not that anybody uses system hair. Um, so that would be a larger thing, but it would give you more flexibility for that sort of thing. Selecting the werewolf, yeah, I'm not surprised. Our handling for selected objects is kind of screwy because we wind up regenerating the wireframe content, I think every frame, which really isn't ideal for complicated objects. Someday it would be nice to fix that. Yeah. Let's see, I'm just looking at this bug about new land impact formula. So you're basically proposing to calculate the land impact purely based on triangles rather than trying to factor in the dimensions. And obviously the biggest problem right now is the fact that we're trying to factor in the dimensions and we're doing it wrong. Yeah, I mean the problem with dimensions is for rigged objects you don't know the dimensions, right? We adjust the land impact for a static mesh when it gets scaled, but with a rigged object, you don't really know how big it's going to be in practice. You could look at the joint positions defined in the mesh, to sort of guess, but then people could play any animations they want to make their object huge or tiny, and there's no way that we could update the land impact on the fly based on what animations are playing. So it seems like if we're trying to factor in dimensions, basically we just have to pick some sort of standard size. Say, well, an animesh is considered to be 2 meters high or something, which it avoids the exploit of pretending that it's microscopically small, but it doesn't it doesn't really give you a kind of precise weighing of how big it is in practice. People already know how to get around the system, maybe. But it doesn't, mostly that exploit mostly is good for getting low rendering cost, right? It doesn't affect land impact because you can't have rigged objects in the world, except now you can, right? That's one reason we're not rushing to get rid of the notion of a triangle count cap is that our other mechanism is not so hot.
What are you thinking on the cap now?
I don't know yet. I mean, if basically the better our land impact calculation is, the less need there is for a cap. But I mean, this is pointed out extensively. But um, there's the there's still the question of the best way to handle that.
I'm still not against like maybe a 200K cap.
So, yeah, my feeling is base the any of the calculations on dimensions is kind of misguided because basically people are going to find ways to see the triangles of their objects, um, and so basically you should be costing it based on how many triangles there are rather than um, assuming that a smaller thing is going to get seen less than a larger thing, or assuming that you even know when something is going to be small or large. Yeah, Beck, I agree. I don't think we want to have the current LOD calculations. That's one of the things we want to take a look at before this goes live. But I mean, even the current LOD handling behavior tends to get heavily customized by people kind of going to town on all kinds of, please destroy my performance debug settings. It's it's hard to stop people from shooting themselves in the foot when you give them an entire armory with the viewer.
Well, that said, I was looking at it the other day, looking at how, I wanted to do LODs like on this little baby. And because it works just like avatars, the changes are so far away that my last LOD, I might as well drop down to nothing because it's almost never going to be seen.
Yeah. Are you using the any overrides for the LOD factors, or using the defaults?
Well, right now I'm just using defaults. I mean, I won't probably do LODs until the very last step, just to get it as low as we can in the last step.
Yeah, no, it's true for avatars. You tend to have to go quite a ways away before you see the low LODs, and as I say, we're probably going to tweak that so with Animesh objects they behave more like other in-world objects. So the lower LODs are going to be more visible. Yeah, as Beck points out, there's this double radius issue, and right now the Animeshes are going through the same calculation as other avatar objects. So it's there's just some additional work to kind of decouple those. Yeah, I guess we're at time. So let's see. If I recall correctly, we do have a meeting next week, and then we'll have some time off over the holiday break. Um, okay, yes. Is there a reason why the Animesh complexity might be a bit higher than Worn? I'm not sure I'm following the question. Are you saying that why are you seeing different numbers for the complexity? It can affect how you're zoomed in on things. I don't know which display you're looking at, but there's some displays that show you kind of triangle counts based on the current LOD that's being displayed. So as you get closer, the triangle count is going to go up. And then the base, the complexity limit then is actually based on the estimated triangles, which are sort of an approximate number that has some relationship to the actual triangle count, but it's actually a bit lower. Um, so you can have something that by the complexity calculations that the server is using is say 20,000, but then it may actually be displaying 25,000 triangles or something when it's getting drawn. All right. Well, thanks for coming, everybody. We'll we'll see you next week, and then not for a bit. Happy modeling.